Hello and welcome to Landscape Photography World, a podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. Annette Ruzicka is an award-winning visual storyteller based in Melbourne, Australia. Following a career in conservation, she developed a deep affinity with the natural world and dedicated herself to telling stories centred on the environment and related issues, including endangered species, First Australians, and mental health in the context of the global climate crisis. Her work has been published in prominent outlets such as the BBC, New York Times, Australian Geographic and The Guardian Australia. Annette has been a finalist for Australia's National Photographic Portrait Prize, the Olive Cotton Portrait Prize, the Clip Award and the Australian Photography Awards. She's won silver in the 2020 BIFAs landscape category and was the 2017 Sunstudios Emerging Photographer of the Year. As a member of the Many Australian Photographers group, she's dedicated to exploring issues facing regional and suburban Australia. In this episode, Annette talks about her focus on positive conservation stories and the challenges and rewards of her field. She shares insights on staying motivated, dealing with failures, and the impact of purpose-driven work, touching on ethical photography and memorable experiences in her career. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day, Annette. Welcome to Landscape Photography. How are you going?
I'm very well, thank you. Cold, but I'm well.
How cold is it?
So you're getting me in Melbourne at the moment. So I think it's one of those is 10 but feels like 3.
Yeah, I know those sorts of days. I lived in Melbourne for a while. I remember a Christmas day where the top temp got to 10.
Oh, Christmas Day?
That's it was 40 degrees on Boxing Day, and then Christmas Day about 2 a.m. light hail started. So we woke up and it was literally a white Christmas. The ground and all the roads and everything were covered with little tiny hailstones.
Wow, that's insane.
We're up near the Dandenong, so that's one of the reasons why. But
elevation there to
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
But I know what Melbourne's like. I wasn't going to say that. It's an interesting climate to live in.
It is. It's just the winters that are a bit miserable.
Anyway, we're here to talk about you and your photography and your filmmaking, etc. So let's start with who you are and why you're a photographer and how you got started.
Sure. I guess I would call myself a conservation photographer and filmmaker. So covering stories to do with obviously conservation, the environment, including First Nations people. So as our first custodians of the land and their role in conservation versus sort of social issues. I predominantly, despite my last story, cover positive stories. For example, because the sad, depressing stuff, because there's a lot of that, would just make it very hard for me to go on a day-to-day basis. But for example,
I don't think you'd have much of an audience for it either, really.
I don't find that the really intense, sad, depressing stuff catapults people into action. I find that when there is action as the antidote to that sort of anxiety about the extinction crisis, that prompts people to do more or support those who do a little bit more than just the doom and gloom stuff, because that is so overwhelming. But taking the last story that I worked on to do with the flying fox crisis in Australia, so that was obviously a very concerning and is a very concerning thing going on with the starvation event. But I focused on the carers and the wonderful thing that they were doing to just do what they could for the thousands of pups that were going into care. Yeah. So sort of taking something making people aware of that issue, but also look at all these wonderful people doing these things and here's why you should support them, blah, blah, blah. And so I got into sort of this particular area because I made a career shift like a long time ago to a conservation organisation, a non-profit. This was my former life, and I was responsible for all their press. They were just an apolitical NGO doing good stuff, and I was responsible for all their media. So I just got really involved in that world and exposed to the people and ecosystems and places and everything to do with the Australian conservation in a very positive way, just that real getting their hands dirty type of stuff. And then it was just changed my life. And I knew that I would be in that conservation world for the rest of my life. And the photography thing was just a natural progression because they were a nonprofit. So I started taking on their photography as well.
Yep.
And then I went, I'm going to study this. And I went back to school part-time, worked full-time, went to school at night to do my photography degree. Yeah. And then made the leap. So that's how it all started. And it's one of those classic, I've always been into photography, was always an amateur photographer, started with film back in my 20s, a long time ago, and just dabbled and then finally made that leap. And I think it was working in conservation and telling those stories from a photographic sense that sealed the deal for me, I suppose.
Would you describe yourself more towards the journalistic style end or more towards the artistic style end of?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose if you looked at my work, you would see more of a photojournalism style there. So more of a traditional approach to the storytelling. And for example, I do photojournalism work. So I've done several stories for Australian Geographic and had work in The Guardian and so on. So that requires a certain way of shooting, which does come naturally to me. I do have a little bit of the more sort of conceptual / fine art kind of work. That is what a lot of photographers would call personal work.
Yep.
Yeah, and that is so a couple of series that I've done very different to the sort of traditional approach that I usually use with my storytelling. But that is very much a sort of passion thing on the side when I have the headspace and to work on that stuff. But to answer your question, yeah, I suppose you would call that sort of a more traditional documentary style approach to storytelling for sure.
Yeah. And in terms of staying inspired and being motivated, aside from the obvious conservation crises that we keep seeing, what is it that drives you to get into that and delve into those stories?
It's the other part of that, besides the obvious, wanting for people to be aware of all the threats to the natural world. It's the people that are doing all the work. So it could be the carers, it could be First Nations rangers, establishing a ranger program, it could be a landowner protecting their patch of land and pulling out the weeds and planting trees. And so people are very much part of that as well, because that sort of somewhat cliched saying that people are the problem, but they're also the solution.
Yep.
They totally are, because we're not going anywhere. Yeah, so that's a huge part of it. Interacting with people, and these like wonderfully driven and often very positive people are really what feeds you. If I was just all the depressing stuff all the time, that would be a lot harder to get out of bed, I reckon.
Definitely. You must have met some amazing personalities and people along the way throughout your career. Can you pick anyone that you would say stands out?
Yes. And gosh, so many. It's one of those things where I want to talk about them all, but I can't. The Flying Fox work is a little front of mind at the moment, just because all of that has just been published. And so it's new and still in my head for me. There is a gentleman, his name, can I use names?
Sure.
His name, he won't mind me using his name. He's very public with his work. His name is Lawrence Pope, and he helped establish the Friends of Bats and Bush Care in Melbourne here, near where the Narrabend colony of flying foxes are. And he has just advocated for so long for flying foxes and been very practical as well in establishing things such as what's called the bat creche near where all the baby bats go to learn how to be bats once they come out of care. So he does a lot of the practical stuff too. And he is the most entertaining and spoken and articulate sort of person. One of the most I've ever met. Like the way he can phrase things and talk about the bats and do so time and time again, despite all the things he has personally encountered, is very inspiring. I have asked him, how do you keep doing this? And he does so he's just got a fabulous, dry, often quite cynical sense of humor. But it is people like that I want to support and help, because the other thing is there needs to be the next sort of wave of people. So this gentleman, he's getting perhaps to an age and a time in his life where he might want to nut in the next sort of wave of advocates, and we need that. So I think that people like him help inspire the next sort of round of people to fill his shoes, essentially. So that's one of them. There's so many. My goodness. Yes.
Yeah, I can imagine. Let's touch on your personal work, as put in inverted commas before.
I've done that, should I?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Do you think it's important to have goals in that sort of photography? And do you set goals for yourself? And how do you, or do you have a process for setting creative challenges for yourself? And it could also move into some of the conservation work as well.
Sure. Look, there could be two very different approaches when it comes to something that you're pursuing on a personal level and one that you are hoping to publish. And the latter really depends on whether you've got what they might call an evergreen story or not. Again, taking the bats as an example, that was an ongoing and unfolding crisis, and it was all just unfolding before our eyes. I very much treated that as a must shoot the heck out of this and get it published as soon as possible. So it was very much a put everything aside and just shoot and get this pitched and out there. So that is very goal oriented, in that the way that the world of journalism in general works is that a story becomes old very quickly. And really, you don't necessarily want anyone to beat you to it. You just got to, get on with that. There could be other stories where there isn't such a sort of extreme need to get it out as quickly. There's that more evergreen, so it doesn't really matter when it comes out. It really comes down to what your purpose is. So what's the reason you're doing the work? Is it you want to get that word out right away because there's this crisis unfolding, or are you working on something to do with climate change and eco-anxiety or climate grief, where you on a personal level need to process, sorry, there's the cat, where you are doing that for a very different reason, and that is to address the sort of your own pain and concern for that particular issue. Yeah, it really all comes, how I personally approach any body of work really comes down to, what is my purpose here?
Yeah. Do you ever look back on your career and ask yourself if you would have done anything differently?
I wish I'd started sooner.
Yeah, don't we all?
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, you look back and go, these are the things that brought me here. I started this in my 20s where, sure, I would have been a lot younger and the gear wouldn't be as hard to carry sometimes. But if I hadn't had success in the first few years, which is very much what happened with me, it was a hard slog to merge into freelancing. I may have given up, had not had the maturity to pursue that sort of dream. So no, I don't know. So to answer your question, I don't think so. There's just really that, and you wish you'd started earlier because maybe you could have had a year in Latin America chasing turtles or whatever. And then when you've got a mortgage, it's a very different kettle of fish. But there's no reason you can't pursue things like that just because you've got your mortgage and stuff. Yeah.
What about the process of experimentation? Do you take risks and push the boundaries of your own work and creative abilities? And how do you, I guess, that always comes with the knowledge that there are going to be failures and setbacks when you experiment, because the very nature of experimentation means there should be failures, because if we always succeeded, it would be a pretty boring life, I think. How do you deal with those failures and setbacks, and how do you deal with that process of experimentation?
The last time again, this relates more to personal work. So I have a particular body of work that looked at my own eco-anxiety, which I hate that word. And that is going beyond that. I don't know why I hate the word, but I don't know. I'm not sure if it's overused or if it really cuts through. But anyway, I digress. And so that came out of the sort of initially the Black Summer bushfires, I raised that body of work because that is probably the most experimental I have been. And so what I actually did, I try to not look at other photographers' work because you can get a little bit lost in either trying to be like someone you admire, or you're just confusing your own sort of path. In my case, I actually took on a mentor. So she helped me just to give me some ideas with experimenting and help me work through what it is I'm trying to achieve. And in that case, I accepted that I probably needed some support and mentorship. So it was the best thing I did for that particular body of work. And it would help me experiment, but also have someone I could regularly trust and go to with my failures. And yeah, totally. There were failures where it was like, okay, that was worth a go, but we'll pursue another path now. And that is certainly the process you have to go through. And you know when it doesn't work, especially when you give yourself some space to not keep staring at the work, but go back to it a couple of weeks later or whatever and say, okay, I don't like that. And but I'm very open to reaching out to others who have dabbled more in the conceptual fine art space, where you've got a set of experienced eyes looking at your work, and bouncing off people generally is really important, because photography can be very isolating.
Yeah, totally.
Not reaching out to others, and you can just get a little bit overwhelmed. So just being able to have that conversation, and that helps you deal with those failures a lot better, because you'll hear from them, oh, this happened to me as well, and oh, I tried this, and no good, and so you don't feel completely alone in where you've stuffed up potentially, or you don't feel that you've wasted your time, because that is certainly part of the process.
I think the other value you can get out of that, and sometimes you look at what you've done and you can be quite excited about it, and then you show it to somebody else and they look at it with their eyes and they go, doesn't really work for me. And whether it's the emotional connection or the compositional structure or whatever it is, that critique coming back, I think, is a really important thing for people to get with their work, because shoving it up on Instagram or whatever, mostly you're just going to get, oh, great shot or whatever, or no response at all if it's really rubbish.
Yeah. And that is just not the kind of engagement that will get you any learnings, or
no, it doesn't really progress your photography in any way, shape or form.
No, in a word, it doesn't. Way too obsessed with social media engagement. Anywho, I won't go there.
We might do a little bit later. I guess one of the key things with environmental photography in particular is that, or the ethical considerations in keeping in mind when photographing in places which might be remote or delicate environmentally. And I'm interested in your take on geotagging and that sort of thing, and the popularity of that can come from taking a stunning image in a delicate environment, and that then, because of social media, driving a lot more traffic into that environment, which then degenerates that environment. Where do you stand in terms of telling people where you've shot? And some places, obviously, it's not going to matter because it's an urban environment, for example, but in others, it's more those delicate environments I'm interested in.
Sure. I've got two responses there. And the first one is easier because a lot of the times I have my photojournalism work and stories that I work on. And then there are other ones where I'm a working photographer in the conservation sector. I am invited to go to a lot of places and photograph or film their stories, and very much work within the realms of their parameters and so on, because it is I'm often on private land, or say, for example, in a community where you can't just waltz in with your camera, or some try, maybe don't do so well. And then, of course, and then in the second part of that response is, again, you can't just, so if there's a concern of revealing a location, not that I've come across too much of that, in that if I show this image, is there going to be a bit of a concern about other people going there? But often I'm there in the first place because I've gone through a process of speaking to people, explaining what I'm doing, where I intend it to go, what my, for lack of a better word, agenda is, what story I'm trying to tell. So I've often had to get permission to maybe go there. Not always, but often. Or so I'm there but with a prior many steps that I've taken to get there in the first place. And you have to, and obviously you're being honest about that and not hiding any sort of other, agenda there. And the work's going to be published anyway, so there's no point in misrepresenting yourself where the images are going. So a lot of the time it isn't that easy for if someone wanted to piggyback onto that shot or location. It isn't necessarily that easy to do. And certainly there are things, you can do, such as turning off the location data and so on, which I have certainly had to do in the past, like with an endangered species. So, and look, another issue is obviously, this is like a sidestep to what you're talking about, but it relates to my work, and that is photographing First Nations people. And that comes with operating with a high level of integrity and respect for what they would request of you. And it is very much a case-by-case basis, but that certainly applies to things like reproducing their photographs and locations and things like that too. Sometimes you might take a shot of a location with permission, but you'll still need to go and check that this is okay to publish, because it's like a two-step process there. Not just taking it and thinking you're right to go. It's checking that this is going to be published and this is where they might see it.
And it's also being made aware of places where you can't go, because there are, in Aboriginal culture in particular, there's women's places and men's places, and never the twain shall meet.
Yes, absolutely. And wording as well that is accompanying. Yes. Yeah. But I suppose if I was ever going to put a species or a particular and like I say, going back to animals, for example, or where an individual is located, some species or whatever, no, I would never. I would just be very careful with location information and things like that, because my objective is to help those critters, not open the floodgates.
Not have them trampled into the ground.
Yes, ideally.
You mentioned the storytelling. How do you incorporate the elements of storytelling and narrative into your photography, and what techniques are you using to convey a sense of mood or emotion in that?
Great question that I don't know how to answer, because all I'm trying to do is show the real, say when I'm like, most of my stories include people, right?
Yeah.
So with the people that are part of that, I'm really just trying to show who they are, who they genuinely are as an individual, their care for that animal or their passion for the environment. And I don't really know how I do that, other than I really do try to get to know these people. It isn't just like click, and sometimes you have to, but generally you're trying to understand who they are, and you do want to, I often wanted to genuinely want to develop a connection with them, because I'm such an admirer of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I'm really just trying to do who they are justice, and how that translates to this bit where I'm picking up the camera and shooting them is, it just becomes a natural process, because I'm trying to show who they really are. And yes, of course, you're looking at things like lighting, and if you happen to be with them at golden hour, you're going to make the most of that. And yes, of course, there's those technical elements you're going to latch onto. But I'm pausing here because I don't really know how you consciously do that, because I have had people say to me, I don't want to big note myself, but I've had people say to me, you seem to really capture these sort of provocative, candid, who they really are. And like yes, I think I'm doing that. But I don't really know how, because you don't consciously set out to, who are you really? And it's just, I think I'm seeing these people with my admiration and respect for them, and my, I think, is just translates through the glass. If that doesn't sound too cheesy, but yeah, I just don't really know how I do it really, or how I consciously.
I think with people in particular, it's probably catching the right facial expression that does express who they are, because our faces are a big part of our communication. And if you know, this is a podcast and it'll be audio first, but there will be a video later. But seeing people talk and talking to them, I think, makes a big difference. Where I'm interested, obviously, in landscape photography world is how you do that with landscape, because obviously the landscape can speak to different people in different ways. And yes, it's the lighting, but it's also that compositional element that I'm always interested in hearing about, is how you say, okay, there's this stand of trees, but there's one that stands out, and how do I make that one stand out from the background and the tangle of branches and all the rest of that? Or if it's a waterfall, how do I express the feeling of how tall it is, or how wide it is, or how powerful it is, and those sorts of things? They're the elements that I'm really keen to understand.
Sure. Yes. Thank you for bringing me back to the landscape stuff.
Okay.
Certainly a very huge part of the story as well. When there are landscapes and nature in general, such as detail, because I do love detail shots, because I find, say, a small a petal or a flower or a bud, or this one little part of the flowering eucalypt that is in light and the other half of it's in the shade. I do love focusing on detail because it is bringing the viewer in, and there's an intimacy to it. In terms of sort of landscape shots that encapsulate that particular part that is relevant to the story, I suppose so in terms of light, which you touched on, I am personally drawn to darker scenes, so darker tones. So whether that's first light or golden hour into sunset and that afterglow, I love the colors and the mood that sort of the lower light shots can bring out in a landscape, especially when there's fading bits of light in a landscape. So say, for example, your example that you mentioned about the trees, so like a stand of trees, if there's a tree with one last bit of light on its trunk, that's what I'm going for. So I'm going to get that one little bit there that is going to show that stand of forest in a very different way. So that's what I guess it comes more naturally to me. So just but then at the same time, I also love golden hour. Who doesn't, right? But it does a landscape justice. And a lot of the time I am working in landscapes where, say in the desert, for example, or in a really arid zone, where a golden hour or your dusk is going to do it the justice.
Yeah, it's going to bring up the colours that you want.
Yeah, exactly. But again, I'm very much on shooting through things. So shooting through the canopy or leaves, or where something is framing the shot, more than just wanting to get an uber sharp wide shot of the sunset coming down over something. So I like to zone in on what's different in that particular landscape at that time. That's just what I'm just naturally drawn to. Emmeline, look, love seeing things from the air as well. So I have a drone, who doesn't, but they're great because, once again, I'm thinking of these wetlands that I shot in New South Wales once, where it was very flat, sort of dry country, but they had internationally significant wetlands there that you wouldn't see if you're just standing there. So everything from the air, it was just incredible. So you use your tools that you are going to do that particular part of the world justice. And in that case, it was really like everything that I took from there was drone, just because it just looked phenomenal. Yes, does that answer your...
No, that was fantastic. I loved it. I'm really interested in the lifestyle choice. You said that you got into it through the conservation area, but how did you make that choice to go freelance and say, okay, this is me, I'm a photographer, I'm going to make money out of it, and that's going to be my career from now on?
Yeah. So how did I make as I mentioned, in my previous life, I managed a lot of media and journalists and stuff who are all pretty awesome, I must say. It's definitely I didn't get the impression that a lot of people say about journalists and photojournalists. It was a great experience. But it just got to a point where I would look at these press photographers or photojournalists, and I want to be them. I don't want to be the one meeting their plane. I want to be on the plane coming. So it was a very easy decision to just say, no, I want to give this a crack, and I just want to take photos all the time. And I naively thought that because I already was working in the conservation sector, it would be easy.
Yeah, that's all you do. You just turn up, take a few shots, come back.
Everyone's going to want to hire me.
Yeah, that's right.
Clearly, that was not the case in the beginning. Yeah,
and there's no admin involved either, you know.
Yeah, so it was absolutely a learning curve, and it was 100% a shock to the system to go freelance and get used to that lifestyle where it's 1:00 on a Monday afternoon and you're not actually doing anything and you think that's weird. Whereas now I'm like enjoying that if I have an opportunity to not do anything on a Monday afternoon. Yeah, but look, the decision was easy. It was just the terror of what if this doesn't work, which that set in a good year into it, where it's a slow burn to build up your name and get clients to
getting people to actually hire you and
and not succumb to, which is absolutely understandable, but not get stuck in another genre of photography that you don't want to be in, which is common, which is absolutely understandable, especially today.
Yeah, you've got to go and shoot the boring stuff to make the money, otherwise you won't be able to go and shoot the exciting stuff. It's a very common, as you say, it's a very common thing for freelance photographers in particular.
It absolutely is, yeah. Yes.
What have you learned from running your own business?
I've learned a lot about myself, to be honest. I really think, I do think that the key things that you learn about being a freelance photographer, aside from the obvious of learning how to run a business and manage your own time and handle rejection and, accept the really average day, but you do learn things about yourself that you never thought were there. And it is a process of change. And obviously you advance from a technical point of view and so on, and dealing with clients and things like that. But for me personally, if say I had a photography student asking me, I would be giving them tips on a more of a personal level in that what to handle and to not take things so hard, because sometimes I do. And because this might generalize a little, but a lot of photographers are creatives. So there's a sensitivity there that
every photo is one of your little babies, isn't it?
Yeah, murdering your darlings. Yes. And that's the rejection element as well and things like that.
Yeah.
And to not compare yourself to others. I read the best quote and it was, comparison is the thief of joy. And
absolutely.
Don't look at other photographers. Don't worry about what they're doing over there. Like, just do your thing. Yes.
Yeah. I always said the only valid comparison is against your previous work. So if you're not improving, then you've got a problem. But if you look back 5-10 years worth of work and you go, okay, well, I can see where I was back then and I can see where I am. And you will find a favorite shot from back then, but most of my stuff from 10 years ago, it's just trash as far as I'm concerned.
Sound like you're being too hard on yourself, I reckon.
Probably. In comparison to what I'm doing now, it's where I won't say it's all garbage, but it's not as good as the work that I'm doing now. And I think that's where people need to put their focus in terms of comparisons, is compare yourself against yourself. Don't compare yourself against others, because everyone out there is at a different level and a different place in their journey in photography. And
you have no idea how they got that picture published in that
exactly.
place. You've got no idea what the backstory is. So assumptions are dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How about the balance? I joked about the admin and so forth. How do you balance the boring bits of doing business with the exciting bits of getting out and taking photography?
For me personally, I suppose I am spending more time shooting and editing than too much of depends where you incorporate the editing thing. Is that the business side of things? Where you're editing for the client?
Editing to me is almost as exciting as the photography. Almost.
Yeah, same. I love editing after a job. Yeah, so look, I don't find the admin business side I think I don't find it like the workload too much. It's just really annoying, like doing your BAS and all that
Just
stuff.
Got to do it, yeah.
Yeah, but I think for me, the most important thing is to accept that your lifestyle isn't Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So when I might take a day off to do something that's just for myself, whatever that might be, don't worry, because 2 months ago I was doing 20-hour days in PNG. So, which was what happened to me last year, because it is absolutely this ebb and flow where you'll be completely overworked, as I was earlier this year, and just exhausted. And when you have the time to just do nothing, or you feel like you're off, or you're totally not, just do it and enjoy it, because who knows how long your shoots are going to be, particularly landscape stuff or out in the field. They are very long days. Often you've got leeches, or you're sweating at 5 a.m, or whatever the kind of conditions are. It's just, yeah, it's really about, for me, and I'm sure for others, that is to take that time off. And maybe don't do your best that day if you could do it tomorrow if you're really that exhausted. So I think rest.
Unless it's due tomorrow.
Yes, that. I think, yeah, rest is really important, and to not feel guilty about just because you didn't work that much that week. That's okay.
I think that's fantastic advice. I'm interested also in where you shoot, and are there any places that are your favourites that you just keep getting called back to?
Gosh, I love just the desert, but my favourite is the Kimberley. So I've been to the Kimberley each time for quite a short stint, which is not a bad problem to have, because that actually was paid jobs. So I've been to the Kimberley 4 times, and there's still so much I want to see, but it is just unlike anywhere in the world, I think, and very special to Australia, very much regarded as one of our last pristine sort of wilderness areas, certainly impacted and modified by not post-European settlement, but it's just incredible. And it's just such an achingly beautiful place, and there's just so much of it, and there's so much to see and enjoy. And it's a different experience of Australia, because there are Indigenous communities there, and the majority of the population isn't white up there. And so you are seeing a different part of Australia that I think that we should engage with a little bit more. But the desert in general, I just love the outback. It just makes my heart ache. Yeah, I love its harshness, but it's just this sort of ancient landscape. And then you get these moments that you can appreciate. You don't have to be a photographer to appreciate a sunset in the outback. Seeing those huge skies, or a big flock of birds flying over like a desert landscape. Oh, yeah, that's my favorite. But obviously Australia and its incredible diversity of landscapes, from rainforest to our oceans, and I don't even know where to start, to describe the diversity. And Australia is described as a mega diverse country, because
even talking about the desert, a lot of people think desert just sand, but just Australia's deserts are very diverse as well. Yes, there's vast tracts where it's just flat, treeless, just scrub bushes and whatever, but the diversity from that to places like the Kimberley and places like out the back of Broken Hill and Birdsville with the Simpson and those huge rolling sand dunes, etc. The diversity just in the desert landscapes on their own is fascinating, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And the survival of life out there.
Oh, absolutely.
Using adapted animals, tiny marsupials and obviously reptiles and so on, but just their ability to have evolved and survive one of the harshest environments in the world. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, and it's just unlike anything most Australians would experience. So get out there.
What's your most memorable experience?
Probably going to have to be boring and say the Kimberley again. 2 of those, in the jobs that I mentioned, 2 of them involved being in a community for about 10 days each time. And I think that's very special. So you've got your amazing environment that you're surrounded by, the landscape of the Kimberley, and the people that live there, and the communities that, were the last communities to witness sort of white people coming in. So there wasn't colonization up there until much later 50 years ago or something. So you're getting this insight into the world's oldest living continuous culture. And unfortunately, there are still communities that live on country, and that's very special. That they are probably my favorites, because I was also getting to see traditional processes that have been used for tens of thousands of years. So they were harvesting materials from the landscape to make tools, things to fix and cool them, and things to carry items in. And that was all part of a very positive project to capture and document these processes to teach younger generations and make a book and an app and all these things. It was the best of both worlds for me, really. It was people and just this incredible landscape.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Lots of favourites. That's up there. Yeah.
What about horror stories or disasters? Have you had any of those?
My only horror stories are like when I have leeches.
Yeah, they're a horror story on their own.
Oh, I had one on my lip once.
Oh, no. Wow.
That was horrific. And you think that I'd be used to that stuff. And I have no issue with critters. I'm way too comfortable with snakes. But leeches, we don't have a good relationship.
Yeah.
And I've had lots of...
I'm definitely not a fan. I remember...
No, how could you be? And look, really, like, shoots are generally like great, but when the weather is terrible and you're up to your knees in mud or traipsing around, or your gear is wet and you're cold and miserable, like, that's not easy.
No.
But on a serious note, the worst part is seeing when really bad things happen to animals. Again, I talk about the flying foxes, but that's just a recent one, and that's at my top of mind, was having to see so many dead bats for a host of reasons, and that's just tragic for such a keystone species. And so pales in comparison, I'm sure, to what a lot of sort of other photographers see who choose to do the more sort of intense conservation stories. But yeah, that's tough. Yeah, just to bring the mood down a little. Yeah.
What has the practice of photography taught you about the world?
Good questions you have.
I'll try.
What has it taught me about the world? Was that the question?
Yeah.
Let me preface this with, I can be a pretty cynical person, assume the worst of people sometimes, which is, I suppose, what it's taught me then is that there are loads of really good people who care and do things, which is a lesson I do constantly need. Yeah, when you turn on the news, for example, in the morning. And so that's probably the most salient lesson that photography has taught me about the world, and to be patient. But that's more of a personal reflection. And it's also taught me that the world from a natural history point of view is just more amazing and complex and fascinating than you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
You know, the evolutionary path that this world has taken, and how our flora and fauna survive and persist is amazing. And I think, given a chance, that it can persist. Yeah, it just needs that chance, and we need to stop destroying everything. There you go. There's my environmental message for you. Snuck that in.
Do you prefer photographing alone or with other people?
Oh, so do you mean, say, having other shooters with me?
Yeah.
Or, it depends on the job, because sometimes I really need help with equipment. I look, unsurprisingly, you get the best experience when you're alone, and I refer to just having that moment where I can just be still and in that moment and enjoy that environment or that landscape, and as well as the connection with people. And on assignments, it's great to have people with you a lot of the time, because you can bounce off each other. You can talk about things. If you've had a bad day or something's failed on you or whatever, you got someone to whinge to. And look, and I personally love having assistants, because it is, as I said before, it's an isolating sort of world, and it is, and I do say a lot of travel by myself and a lot of driving by myself, and while I do enjoy those moments, sometimes it's also nice to not always be alone, and you got someone to have a beer with at the end of a shoot.
I think that definitely helps.
Yeah, for sure.
What does your process look like in terms of in the field? But then I'm also interested in when you get home from a shoot, and whether or not you're straight into editing and what editing looks like for you.
Sure. In the field, if people are with me, as in their subjects that are relevant to the story, I will initially just watch them. I'll be taking pictures, but I like to observe. Have you ever heard that expression, you're a taker or a maker with photography? So I'm a taker, which is where that documentary style approach
melt into the background and just...
Yeah. If a photographer tells you they never tweak a scene or whatever in front of you, then they're lying. That's not to say that's unethical. It's not. It's just something you might need to move that broomstick out of the way so you could see the person. But I do like to naturally just see things unfold in front of me. I do like to ensure that I have plenty of time with the person, or not leave it to just that one visit. That's obviously different when it comes to client work. So when I'm given an assignment by a client or whatever, but I still would communicate, I suppose, that there needs to be plenty of time and to just give the shots the justice they deserve, and just to let things unfold, because nothing's worse than a rushed shoot. So yeah, there's very much an observation element, and a communication between the two of us. And I might ask things, and then there'll be a moment to shoot what they're doing, for example, and then that process will repeat. So I'll observe and shoot in the meantime, and then I might get them to stop what they're doing momentarily so I can get a portrait or whatever, and then carry on with that process and ask for suggestions. Say if someone's turned up for a story and they're the main talent, then, but they sometimes are like leaning on you, or tell me what you want me to do, but no, like I explain to me like how you do this work. What's your process with planting these trees or setting up this enclosure or whatever? What would you normally do? Because you do want to be true to what they're actually doing as part of whatever their conservation work happens to be. In terms of the landscape, nature, detail element, that is very much a walk and see process for me. It is just walking around, stop and look at things, and don't bypass things too quickly, because all you might need to do is take a step to your right and something will look completely different.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If I see a scene in a field, or like in that landscape that I think is very beautiful, I'll probably go bananas shooting it. And obviously you've got your different lenses and your different cameras, and I will definitely try all the approaches, shoot the bejesus out of something, which lots of photographers would claim they do, because you just want to exhaust all the visual
You want to wring everything you can out of that scene, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I often find the stuff that I'll get towards the end is the better stuff when I first shot. That can vary, but yeah, that's just what I find. But that's, very much it's sort of like that walk in the forest approach. And you're taking it slow, and that's what I love, because I go hiking, I go on bushwalks, and that's very much one foot in front of the other. Go opposite. It's just a stroll and getting off that beaten path, taking a little sidestep somewhere, and to not really, I don't have too much planned out really, you know. There's I don't want to take a ton of gear and set up and have all these tripods and blah blah blah, and then like be like chained to the gear. I do like to shoot a bit lighter than perhaps others do. Like I'll have a little
backpack. You're shooting handheld then?
Obviously not at dusk, but most of my stuff is handheld, definitely, because I just like that freedom. That's not a criticism of any others who they're with their tripod.
It's a choice you make in the moment, I think. And sometimes the handheld stuff can be just as fascinating as the long exposure stuff that you might do on a tripod.
Yeah, and it comes down to your personal style and the kind of shots that you like to produce. Like I need to be able to walk in the forest or the bush or wherever it is. I want to be able to clamber down that sort of embankment, which is what I had to do for my bat work. So you just I want the flexibility of movement. Yeah, because I am often alone. So it's just, but I also love that stuff. Like I love just being alone and just listening to the sounds, and it's very restorative. But that would certainly be my process to being in the field. And also I love getting down low and getting little bits and bobs and just the different stuff. Yeah, I must admit, I do try and not approach landscape work or nature in general or wildlife too. That is, I try to be less traditional there. the more sort of emotive, as I said, the low light stuff to me, is my preferred approach. Yeah.
And what about when you get back from a shoot?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot that bit.
Are you straight into it, or are you
straight in? No, straight in. Especially if I think I've gotten some good stuff. So obviously, most photographers would upload straight away because they need to back up their files.
Yeah,
but
the backup's the obvious bit. I'm more interested in the processing.
Yeah, I love to have it depends how exhausted I am, but I'll definitely have a quick squeeze straight away, and I'll definitely earmark some of the ones that I love. And then I might go back for another edit. Depends how big the day was or days and things like that. But no, I'll look straight away for sure. Yeah. For sure.
What about when things aren't working for you and you hit a creative wall? Have you ever had that situation? And if so, how did you deal with it?
I'm just pausing because I'm just thinking about when I've hit a bit of a creative wall. So in the field, if I just feel like things not working, I just stop and try something else. But again, this will probably disappoint you, but that in a lot of ways refers more to when people are part of that landscape.
Yeah, right.
When this isn't working for whatever reason, and I'll just change it up altogether rather than just trying to flog a dead horse. And but look, from a landscape or nature point of view, I'll probably just move on, quite simply. It's just and you just look for somewhere else. And when you found somewhere that's better or that's going to have more opportunities for you. So quick. I think when I first started and when I was a student, you just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. At least you've covered all your bases, but probably the second place that you went to where you're a bit more fatigued and was probably better. So it is about learning to just call it when you're just not feeling it. And in terms of like wildlife as part of that, that's a patience game, certainly. But I will move on if I think I might have a better chance. Or you're getting so frustrated, you just need to go for a little walk. And there might be that critter might come down a bit later. And persistence is key there, like particularly for wildlife photography and every wild photography. And more than one visit, certainly.
Yeah, definitely.
But you do need to recognize and just act. I think when you know that, you've hit a wall or it's just not looking great, just move on. There'll be something else down there, or you can just try something else. Yeah. Because when you persist and you just through the lens, this is not going to be the best stuff, then it's just going to make you feel like you're going to lose confidence in that during your shooting time there.
What do you see as photography's place in society at the moment?
The same as I've always thought, despite the threat of AI and deep fakes and all that stuff, for place in the world. And there's far better quotes out there than I'm about to say it, but it can change hearts and minds. That's why I do it. I don't care what anyone else thinks or says, and how cynical people might get, or the sort of fast-paced nature of now photography and what's expected, and with social media and fickle audiences and all that stuff. All I need is to change one person's mind about something or cut through to one person, and I'm happy. Because if I know about that one person, I know for that one there will be others.
Yeah.
And I believe that it is the more positive, action-oriented stories that are going to prompt that response. I still believe that photography has that ability to change hearts and minds and attitudes, and that is 100% why I do this.
Fantastic. What's the future of photography?
I don't know. Photography will always have a place, right? It will. Of course, AI will change things, and it already is.
Painting hasn't gone away, despite the fears that early photography instilled in some painters' minds.
No, look, and everyone's a photographer these days. So photography, despite its misuses or the importance put more on selfies these days, or to bring it back to landscapes, inappropriate selfies with animals, or off rock edges that will
putting yourself in dangerous situations.
Yes, exactly. Photography is not going anywhere. It will go through an evolution just like it did with digital and so on. But I have no concerns about the role of photography in the future to serve its purpose, despite the diminishing, say, pool of press photographers and so on. But It is a question I have not pondered too much because I know I'm going to keep clicking away and telling these stories, and that's really all that matters. What would matter is if we all start to put down that and stop telling those stories. And I certainly am not going to stop doing that. Yeah, it will always have its place. Yeah.
Fantastic. What's the best and or worst piece of advice anyone's given you?
The best advice I've ever received is to remember what your purpose is for being a photographer. Like, why? Why do you want to shoot this stuff? So that is the best advice. And that guides what you're shooting and where you want to move in your photography career. Yeah. And I'm talking about being a paid working photographer. Yeah, your purpose. The worst advice. Oh, God, why don't you get into corporate headshots? That's terrible, isn't it? No, and that's not to discourage headshot photographers because I've done my fair share. Yeah. But my point of using that example is feel that that said to me, you need to diminish your said purpose or dilute your purpose just to make a living.
Yeah, yeah.
And you don't, if you don't want to. That is why that was the worst advice, is because it wasn't acknowledging there could be success in the path that I wanted, like my dream.
Yeah.
So that's why I need to qualify that one.
I think that's fantastic. And the qualification was absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that. Are there any photographers out there that I need to be talking to?
Do you know who'd be so obviously I'm going to tell you about people who I know and
yeah, that's
so her name is, I just need to actually pronounce her surname accurately. So I'm just going to go to my phone. I hope that's all right. And I can always, she's a bit like me in a lot of ways in terms of what we shoot, and she speaks really well and stuff like that as well. So her name is Harriet Spark.
Okay.
So she's part of Grumpy Turtle Films.
Okay.
She's a photographer in herself. She does a lot of underwater stuff. So if you want pure land, it doesn't matter if it's pure landscape stuff, right? Loads of like underwater landscapes essentially, and obviously creatures. So their big focus is underwater stuff. She does lots of other stuff, but she'd be a good one to chat to. She's really engaging and passionate, and yeah, so she's a photographer in her own right, but she's also part of this team, Grumpy Turtle Films, with her husband, who is also an underwater filmmaker. Yeah, they'd be a good one. But I could certainly have a further think and send you some names if you, to have a chat to.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Annette.
No worries.
Well, I've got one more question for you, and for
let me just put my phone back on silent because I took it off flight mode to get her surname. And sorry.
I've got one more question for you, and for many people, it's a very important issue, not just in the photography community, but do you enjoy pineapple on pizza?
Yes. I love pineapple on pizza, and anyone who doesn't is an idiot. No, I'm just kidding. It's so normal to me to have pineapple on pizza, especially because I'm a vegetarian, so it's a little bit of extra.
Yeah, a little bit of sweetness there with the veg. Yeah.
Question.
Fantastic. All right, it's been really wonderful getting to know you more, Annette, and I'd really like to share or help you share your work with my listeners. Where can people find your work?
AnnetteRuzicka.com.au. So I could say that slower if you like, but I'm on Facebook, obviously, and Instagram as Annette Ruzicka Photography. Instagram is where I am most active.
Fantastic. I'll make sure there's links to everything in the show notes as well.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks very much, Annette.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show. Keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com, along with prints and photography gear. I'm also on Vero, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.